Remember Jerry Bremer? We got him. This is just another one of those. This is the early theatrics surrounding a stupid, dangerous, destructive policy by the United States. Yeah, it's easy to launch a Delta Force operation. They were supported by Task Force 160, the helicopters, special pilots specifically trained. They probably actually had some Rangers inserted early to try to ensure that they could get in and get out. And we can't rule out the possibility that a couple of Maduro's generals were bought off to facilitate the U.S. getting out with Maduro. But that the notion that this is going to, quote, solve the problems and make Venezuela great again, it's just nonsensical. This is a familiar pattern. Early success creates the illusion of control. Just like Iraq, elite operations look clean, but they don't solve political reality. That's why the Vietnam comparison matters. Once regime change becomes the goal, escalation follows. And history shows how that ends. Has Donald Trump just bought for the United States another Vietnam? Well, he's bought himself a tar baby by his, initially said, oh, this was a regime change, we're just arresting a criminal overseas, and then, okay, we're going to be running Venezuela until we figure out what the government is. So that means this is another new expression of U.S. regime change where we're going to try to control it. Here's the problem with Venezuela. Let's assume that 60–70% of the population of Venezuela support what has been done. They're glad to be rid of Maduro. There's still another 30% out there. They've got guns. They've got access to the borders of Brazil and Colombia that are uncontrollable. This is where the danger becomes clear. What starts as an arrest quickly turns into control. And control turns into ownership of the problem. That's the trap. Even if a majority supports regime change, a committed minority with weapons, borders, and regional access is more than enough to fuel long-term instability. History shows that's how occupations begin and how they spiral. Look at Colombia as an example. Colombia has been fighting the forces, armadas, revolutionarios. Colombian, since 1964. 61 years the government of Colombia with the backing of the United States with U.S. military special forces have not been able to contain, kill, or destroy the FARC. They have remained a presence in Colombia. You're going to see the same thing here in Venezuela. They're going to be no-go areas. And whatever U.S. personnel show up on the ground to quote, rule Venezuela initially, they're going to have to be heavily protected. This is the lesson Washington keeps ignoring. FARC survived decades of U.S.-backed operations, not because Colombia was weak, but because insurgencies don't need to win. They just need to endure. And Colombia proves the point. If a state fighting since the 1960s couldn't fully eliminate an armed movement, Venezuela won't be different. You don't get control, you get no-go zones, permanent insecurity, and forces trapped defending themselves instead of governing, as everyone knows, the oil business in Venezuela has been a bust, a total bust. For a long period of time, they were pumping almost nothing by comparison to what they could have been pumping and what could have taken place. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country. So, in one movement, he has kidnapped the head of state of a sovereign nation, and now he's going to steal the oil. All this under the pretext of fighting drugs. I don't think the American public buys this, Larry. American public mostly doesn't care. Unfortunately, you know that they like the show. Oh, we got see the explosions. Oh, that's nice. And nobody got killed. And we don't know how many. Actually, Venezuelans were killed in the process. They'll keep that. But whose care? They're Venezuelans. They don't matter. They're inconsequential. This is where the justification collapses. Once regime change slides into resource control, the moral cover disappears. You can't kidnap a head of state and then claim benevolence by promising to fix the oil sector. And the most unsettling part is the reaction at home, when war becomes entertainment and foreign lives are treated as expendable. Accountability vanishes. That's not strategy. That's decay. And Venezuela is just the latest stage for it. And I think what one thing we cannot rule out that this is the first step in preparation for an attack on Iran to secure the Venezuelan oil as an alternative source in the event that in the aftermath of an attack on Iran closes of the Persian Gulf, the Straits of Hormuz, and there is, then suddenly an oil crisis, and that puts Venezuela in strong position. But again, the United States, part of the reason the oil industry in Venezuela has suffered has been because of U.S. sanctions and because of U.S. efforts to undermine the government of Nicolas Maduro. Remember, this entire effort, again started with Chavez and Maduro, is predicated on the fact that they took the oil away from these foreign companies that were basically exploiting the Venezuelan resource for their own benefit without Venezuela itself benefiting from that oil exploration. So this is what Trump is talking about. He says they stole our oil. It's not American oil. There may be infrastructure there that American oil companies built so they could exploit Venezuela, but the oil is in the ground, and it belongs to the country on top of the ground. Yeah, Trump would have been better off stating, we're stealing their oil, but because we're bigger, we're going to take it. This is where the logic fully unravels. If Venezuela becomes a hedge for potential war with Iran, then this was never about drugs or democracy. It was about energy security through force. And the irony is unavoidable. Sanctions helped Venezuela's oil industry. Then that collapse is used as justification to take control of it. Calling it our oil doesn't make it so. Resources belong to the country they sit under. Anything else is just power. Politics dressed up as policy. Trump is dressing this up as if we're fighting terrorism or we're fighting narrow traffickers when in fact, I guarantee you if Congress conducted a full investigation, they discovered that the roots of these so-called narrow terrorists were in fact created by my former organization, the CIA. This exposes the contradiction. If these networks were created by past covert policy, then using them as justification makes no sense. You can't manufacture a threat and then claim moral authority for fighting it. Trump was unable to state a legal basis for what he did because there is no legal basis under the Constitution, under federal law, under international law, under 3 treaties, all of which the United States has written, not the least of which is of the UN Charter. They trumped up charges against him, against Maduro at the tail end of the first Trump administration. The Biden administration decided they couldn't prove the case, so they decided not to prosecute. Now, the Trump administration engages in this kidnapping. Talk to me about China and the likely reaction in Beijing. Well, we've already before going there. Let's just simply note that the Trump administration is seizing on this loophole. You keep hearing the mantra, well, he was not a legitimate president, that he was not legitimately elected. He was an illegitimate president. That's the one caveat in international law that you can hang your hat on that as long as they're not legitimate. This is the core problem. If there's no legal basis under domestic law or international law, including the United Nations Charter, then legitimacy becomes a political excuse, not a legal one. Calling a leader illegitimate doesn't create authority. It just exposes how thin the justification really is. Should Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov believe anything that Donald Trump or his emissaries say? Well, I think this actually will lead to a fundamental realignment in what Russia's willing how they're going to approach the United States going forward, because this comes on the heels of the U.S. attempt to kill Putin, and I'm more certain of that. Wait, what did you say? U.S. attempt to kill Putin? Yes. Yes. You know the notion. I have my doubts. I thought maybe it was the Brits until those articles in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal leaked, and the CIA said, oh, no, there was no attempt to kill Putin. No, we were, the Ukrainians were aiming at a military target that was in the vicinity. Well, how the hell does the CIA know what the Ukrainians were aiming at, unless we help them aim? Number one. Number two, the Russians have recovered one of the other condensers or transistors that it had the targeting information on it, as well as the navigational information. They exploited that. It absolutely was aimed at Putin's house. This is why trust collapses. If Moscow believes Washington was complicit in targeting Vladimir Putin, then diplomacy becomes meaningless. From that point on, nothing said by Sergei Lavrov's counterparts is taken at face value. States don't negotiate with actors they believe are trying to eliminate them. They prepare for confrontation instead. Now, the only question that remains, was this a rogue CIA operation without Donald Trump's knowledge or with Donald Trump's knowledge? But you factor that in, because remember the reaction of the Russians to that event last Sunday, while Trump's meeting with Zelensky in Mar-a-Lago. That attack is launched, and then in the aftermath of that when we saw Sergei Lavrov's furious reaction, accompanied by that of Pesco, and this was in reaction to an attack that didn't kill anybody. So did this sent a message that the United States was being duplicitous. Then on top of that, you get the New York Times report, extensively noting that the CIA has either been granted special dispensation or is not subject to Donald Trump's restrictions, and it's been carrying out attacks on refineries. It's been carrying out attacks on Russian ships. The CIA is out of control. But yet here is Donald Trump praising the CIA for its work and what it's done with Maduro. So, the Russians are viewing all of this not as separate incidents that are unrelated. It's developing as part of a theme. The United States is lawless. It's going to do whatever it can regardless of whether it violates international law or not. From Moscow's perspective, this isn't chaos. It's a pattern. Whether authorized or not, repeated covert actions signal one thing. The Central Intelligence Agency operates without restraint. When Donald Trump praises those actions, credibility collapses to Russia. These aren't isolated events. They're proof that the United States is willing to bypass law whenever it suits its interests. We are now involved with another foreign war, and I would just simply remind people of that well. This thing was a great success. We didn't lose anybody. Remember, mission accomplished. And then a couple of months later, all of a sudden, the United States was engaged in a very serious insurgency inside Iraq, and we spent 21 years unable to contain the Taliban. So this is now just open up another black hole that will pour money into data, I suppose, if Beijing decides to seize Taiwan. Under Donald Trump's theory, we'll just sit back and let them do it. Yeah, well, you can make the case that the United States has now provided a rationale for the Chinese to do exactly that, and then to shove it back. And the U.S. said, hey, the Taiwanese where they were actually No, they could manufacture an entire case about how the Taiwanese were smuggling drugs into China, that they were encouraging insurgent groups. It's easy to manufacture a case like that, and then the Chinese could easily take it. This is the warning history keeps repeating. Early success turns into long-term entanglement. Mission accomplished was set in Iraq, and the consequences lasted decades. The same happened with the Taliban, and there's a second danger here. By normalizing this logic, Washington hands others a template. If the U.S. can invent justifications, so can China, including over Taiwan. That's how precedents become global problems.